How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the African Comic, and today we actually get to talk about DC, the state of DC. And I'm excited to talk about this because if you're a DC fan, there's a lot that's gone on over the last almost 10 to 15 years that's either gotten you very excited, gotten you very pissed off, right? And we're about to talk about it because DC is very near and dear to me. And it's in a pretty precarious place right now, and we're about to talk about it. So let's talk about it. But before we do, let's cue the intro. Now, DC Studios, formerly known as DC Films, is actually an American film, TV, and animation studio that is a division of Warner Brothers. Now, actually, a division of Warner Brothers Discovery. It is dedicated to the production of film, series, and animation based on characters from DC Comics. Now, obviously, we all know their flagship franchise is the DCEU, and we're going to talk about the DCEU a little bit later, but it's my best franchise coming from DC Studios. Something that you don't know is after the release of their first film in 1967, Warner Communications basically purchased National Comic Publications and then Warner Brothers Seven Arts in 1969. This purchase meant that the company's theatrical and television distribution was basically turned over to Warner Brothers, which basically led to the launch of films and TV series, a lot of TV series, right, based off of obviously DC Comics. In the 1980s, Warner Brothers basically acquired the distribution rights after the release of Superman and Swamp Thing. And then soon enough, the Batman movies marked the return to the big screen. Now, this began the era of DC films, starting with Batman 1989 with Michael Keaton, a pretty good movie that a lot of people had no faith in, and we'll talk about why later. That movie had a budget of 48 million but made over 400 million, and that started the success. Well, basically that showed that comic adaptations, especially in film, could actually become successful for studios, and this being Warner Brothers Studios, right? They realized, we can actually make money. And soon enough, it came another Batman movie, 1992, a sequel to 1989, same character with Michael Keaton. This time, it grossed damn near 400 million with a budget. Now, this time I had a bigger budget of $100 million, but it still showed the fact that studios, specifically Warner Brothers, could actually make money with comic-based adaptations. Now, again, this is one of those things that sometimes people fall into a trap, right? One thing you'll hear me say a lot is you can actually do a lot with really good writing, really good casting, and really good directing. And Batman 1989 and 1992 had all of those three elements, and that's why they were successful. Soon enough, Warner Brothers did something. They decided to keep this trend of Batman movies. And next thing you know, they had another movie come out in 1995, Batman Forever. Now, this movie grossed over 300 million with a $100 million budget, but critics killed it. Now, followed closely to that was Batman and Robin in 1997, which grossed a mere 238 million with a budget right under 100 million. This time having Hollywood heartthrob George Clooney. And again, I honestly believe he could have played a good Batman, but again, writing, casting, the other characters that were, or the actors that were cast to play different roles didn't really match up and didn't feel like Batman movie. It felt more like a kid movie. It was really crazy. The fight scenes, it wasn't as badass as Michael Keaton's Batman. And lo and behold, they didn't make money. Now, these two movies were basically commercial flops for Warner Brothers, right? And again, it's the thing where people get, what do they call it in basketball, where the hot hand, right? When a player starts hitting and everybody believes, well, he's going to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. Well, unfortunately, you can't overcome certain things in the film industry, and Warner Brothers could not overcome their greed. Money leads to a lot of things, right? So they figured, why not make a couple more Batman movies? Well, they shouldn't have. Now again, with the Michael Keaton Batman movies, those movies had really good writing, really good casting, and a director that really took risks, right? I mean, casting Michael Keaton as Batman. Now, obviously, at the time I was a kid, right, when this movie came out, I didn't understand the backlash. But looking back, he basically went through hell trying, because people couldn't see him before Batman. He was basically this funny guy, this, like he made like Lifetime type movies, right? Nobody could see him as this character, but lo and behold, he portrayed this character and everybody considers him as Batman. Like even now, I think he made a commencement speech last year, if I'm not wrong, where he ended it by saying, "I'm Batman," and you believe it. So again, when things work, you notice these things work because certain elements work in these movies. Good writing, good casting, good directing. They had it. These other two movies, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, unfortunately suffered from lack of these three things. Now, before I move on, I just wanted to mention a 1997 movie that came out called Spawn. I don't know if any of you know Spawn. It's one of my favorite movies. This movie had great casting. This movie had great directing, and it had really, really good writing. They actually kept story in the comics. Now, Spawn, unfortunately, was ahead of its time. And there's another movie that we'll talk about later that was also ahead of its time. So, unfortunately, it didn't do as well as it was supposed to because, number one, it didn't really have great marketing. Because, again, people didn't know a lot about Spawn. But if you watch that movie, and I would highly recommend you watch that movie, you'll see that this movie is actually really done for a movie that came out in 1997 with an actor that was pretty much unknown but took on a role and made it his own. And from that point on, I've always seen him as Spawn. It's a really, really good comic book. It's one of those graphic based movies. Actually, they had a show on HBO that actually became way more popular. I wish they would have had it before this movie came out. Probably would have led to a lot of money, a lot of money. But yeah, just wanted to mention Spawn, and this movie made shy over 100 million. So it did okay, but not good enough to where the studio saw potential. And also the fact that it was R-rated, that also meant that parents definitely would not allow their kids to watch Spawn. So it suffered from a few things. Number one, timing, but also R rating. Up until then, you didn't really have any comic adapted movies that were rated R, right? You've had a few since then, but unfortunately, that made this movie also not do as well or not be received as well as I would have hoped or they would have hoped. Now, obviously, this Warner Brothers needed to do something, needed to retool, right? The 90s weren't, outside of 92 Batman, the 90s weren't kind to Warner Brothers Studios as far as DC adapted movies. And so they had to go back to the drawing board and really, focus on the new millennium, right? The 2000s. So Batman Begins was DC's first start into the 2000s, and it did extremely well. It made close to $400 million. And the reason it did, again, because great writing, great casting, great directing. Christian Bale as Batman. He will forever be Batman. I mean, Christopher Nolan as a director. How many movies have you watched from this man and you're like, this man just knows how to direct a movie? And then good writing. The Dark Knight trilogy is one of considered actually the best comic adapted movies ever. I mean, these three movies alone grossed over 2.5 billion for Warner Brothers and DC. So they hit it big. Those three elements again came to play in these movies. And again, the Joker, Heath Ledger, casting. I mean, who remembers Bane, right? Casting. You can't beat that. And so when these elements align, you have the elements, you actually have the recipe for success. You have the recipe for success when you follow these three elements. And they did in between these three really successful movies. They had, especially the 2000, between 2000 and 2010, they had a lot of misses. And one of them is really sad to talk about because it was, well, we're going to talk about it. Catwoman. Catwoman was hot. It was hot garbage. I'm sorry. I love Halle Berry. I think every man at some point has loved Halle Berry, but she was not. She was not. She was not the best actor to portray Catwoman. I'm sorry if you watch that movie, you try as hard as you can to see her as Catwoman, but you really cannot. You can't see her as Cat. And the movie was trash. Writing was awful, directing was awful, and casting across the board was awful. And so bad to say that about Halle Berry because she's so good. I mean, Sue, like when you see her as Storm in X-Men, you're like, yes, yes, you're Storm. But as Catwoman, no, no. So the movie crashed and burned. Catwoman basically made under 90 million with a budget of 100 million. What does that tell you? The audience was like, yeah, no, didn't work. Soon after, followed by Superman Returns. Oh my God, 2006. Another good actor cast to play a role that he wasn't ready for. Role wasn't ready for him. But you got to give him credit for trying. I mean, there's certain parts of that movie that you go, oh my God, this could have worked out. It really could have worked out. I don't think it didn't do well because of him, but I think it also failed because I think 2 out of 3 of those elements weren't really in this movie. One being the story, 2 being directing. I honestly think he could have, Brandon Ruth, who has actually portrayed Superman in the Arrowverse and done well. And I actually like him in the Arrowverse. But unfortunately, this movie, again, was plagued by not having an alignment in all 3 of these elements. Because you're portraying Superman. I mean, you're taking on a character that is bigger than everything in comics, right? So you understand the gravity of it. So as a studio, those 3 things should matter. But when you rush because you're trying to make money and because you feel like the name can sell it, Superman, you forget all of these things. And next thing you know, you make a movie that honestly was garbage as well. That movie had a budget over 200 million and that movie made less than 400 million. What does that tell you? The audience, the truth. These are 2 movies back to back, bombing, and it's sad. In 2000 to 2010, you can say it was a hit or miss for DC. Here you have the Dark Knight trilogy. Now, the last movie came after 2010, but here you have the Dark Knight trilogy that is killing it in the theaters, right? Killing it worldwide. And I think that this actual trilogy started this comic movie revolution, right? Because I think soon after, or rightly before The Dark Knight Rises, I think that's when the first Iron Man movie came out, and I think because of the success of the Dark Knight trilogy, now Marvel comes along and decides we're gonna get in on this, you know. So you can say the early 2000s were hit or miss for Warner Brothers and for DC, but then soon enough they followed that with some other trash movies, but also some good ones. So let's keep talking about this. Now, soon after that came Green Lantern, another favorite character of mine, 2011. This movie, played by Ryan Reynolds, again, good casting. Fortunately, this movie didn't do well, and it didn't do well because, again, those three elements that we talk about, even though it didn't really suffer a lot from casting, because I really believe Ryan Reynolds, he was a good Lantern. But you still have two other elements, directing and writing. And unfortunately, it lacked those two elements. And because of that, even though you have star power in Ryan Reynolds, but unfortunately, those two elements made this movie not do well. And also CGI. There are certain parts with the CGI. I mean, need I say more? Look at his face. Soon after Green Lantern and Green Lantern's disappointment came Zack Snyder to the rescue. And I love the fact that Warner Brothers decided to go in a direction that they took a risk. I get, sometimes when you take a risk, you win. They won big. Zack Snyder, Man of Steel, 2012. I mean, it's like hitting a home run. Your first time ever. You just got drafted into the major leagues. Your first at bat, home run, Man of Steel. I mean, that movie was outstanding. Great casting, great directing, and great story. When you actually look at Henry Cavill, don't you see Superman? Like, seriously, that man exudes and embodies the Man of Steel. So this movie was awesome. And I remember watching it because, again, coming from Watchmen, right? I remember seeing Man of Steel. I remember watching it and seeing it dark, because Zach's directing is very, very intense. Like, he loves using, his movies are shot for IMAX. So they're pretty intense. They're like right in front of you, right? He loves this idea of directing where it's not really wide, but it's like right here. I remember watching it and going, there's nothing like this. Like, you've seen comic movies. You've never seen anything like it. And because of that, lightning in a bottle. This movie made over 700 million. A hit. Now, in 2017, we got another good movie. Wonder Woman came out. I mean, and it came out to outstanding reviews. This movie made over $800 million. Gal Gadot's first really big big movie, big opportunity. She's playing Wonder Woman. And you got to understand, certain characters, they bring a lot of challenges, right? They bring a lot of challenges. They bring a lot of pressure. And she took it on. And when I tell you, she killed it. She was badass. But this movie was a success because of all those three elements that we've talked about constantly. The moment I saw her at the end in BVS and I saw her as Wonder Woman and I heard the Wonder Woman theme song. By the way, I felt the Man of Steel's theme song. Ugh. I mean, Hans Zimmer is just outstanding. I saw her playing, like, I could see the next 10 to 15 years, right? Then when you saw Henry Cavill and you saw Batman, Ben Affleck, and you saw Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, you were like, we're going to be spoiled for the next 10 to 15 years, because how can you get this lucky? And when they do these characters justice and the movies come out as good as they do, the audience tells you they like them because they're making money. How can you not picture the next 10 years of outstanding DC movies, DC content? This was one of those movies. But like I said before, Warner Brothers started listening to critics. And they started interfering in movies. And they started interfering in directing. And they started interfering in writing. And they started interfering in casting. And that, unfortunately, led to what we're about to talk about. One of the biggest travesties in film. I honestly believe this is one of the biggest travesties in film. I'm talking about Justice League. I remember when Zack Snyder basically mentioned the fact that coming off of Batman versus Superman, coming off after Wonder Woman was going to be Justice League. Now, like I said before, Zack clearly had a direction for where he was going with the DCEU. And we knew it because even in Wonder Woman, which was actually directed by Patty Jenkins, produced, I think Zack was also a producer in that movie. You could clearly see that there were elements from each movie and they kind of carried into each movie, right? Even though this is a different director, she has her own style of directing, her own style of storytelling, and all of this. She still followed Zack's arc. This is where we're going. This is how we're showcasing these characters, right? Fighting, like the visuals. Even though Wonder Woman was clearly really, bright and colorful, but there were elements, especially when she would fight, where you're like dark, you know. So Zack clearly had a sense of direction, and when we heard that he was going to direct Justice League, I mean, for most of us, we've only seen Justice League, or all these characters come together in animation, especially for DC. Like, we hadn't seen it in the theater. This movie had its fair share of critics because here came Justice League. He was going to introduce new characters like Cyborg, The Flash, and Aquaman. But at the time, these three characters didn't have solo movies. Okay, so that created you had certain critics come out and say, "Wait a minute, you're not following what Marvel's doing. DC is not Marvel, but Warner Brothers are listening. They're seeing all the success Marvel is having. Mind you, DC is having success as well, right? So they decide, well, we're going to wait for an opportunity and we're going to do some dumb. This is really family content, but I feel like cursing, but I'm not. We're going to do some dumb stuff. So when Zack basically started directing Justice League, so all the characters came back, knew that, okay, we were going to get these characters, but one thing you know about Zack very, very, he doesn't, everything he does has a reason, there's a purpose, but at the same time, he actually allows you to understand what he's doing. So we knew, even though we were going to get these characters that didn't have solo movies, that he was going to have stories in the movie that allows us to understand these characters, right? So like you saw in BVS, you saw with Batman and Wonder Woman's interaction, especially online, when he was able to get the picture she was looking for, there was a link that you could see Aquaman clearly, you could see the Flash, and you could see Cyborg. So we knew from that movie, we knew that was going to carry on into Justice League. Zack, unfortunately, went through something extremely difficult. He lost his daughter in post-production, basically. And like any grieving parent, he decided to basically step away and go spend time with his family like any normal person would, and any normal company or organization would understand that. So here's somebody suffering through something that is unimaginable for a lot of us who are not parents, the death of your child. Nothing else matters at that point. Remind you, the movie's in post-production, which means it's done. These actors have moved on to other projects. Even at the time, Henry Cavill was actually filming Mission Impossible. Warner Brothers decide while he's doing this, yeah, we're pretty much going to destroy this movie. They decide to hire somebody from Marvel, coming from Marvel, Josh Whedon, who goes on to destroy this movie. I've mentioned this before. You can destroy any movie with bad casting, bad directing, bad writing. This movie had outstanding casting, which means he decided to change the story and he decided to direct like a... I was told to always respect my elders. I remember, now again, as a fan base, we don't know this is going on. We know Zach has lost his daughter. We know this. We're empathizing. We're grieving with him, you know, because it almost feels like we have a connection with this man now. So we're grieving with this man. We don't know that back here, Warner Brothers has decided, okay, let's do this dumb stuff. Bring on this man. And again, remember, I just said all these, majority of these actors had gone on to do different movies. So their obligations were done with Justice League. But then they're asked to come back, asked to do a new movie. New movie. But as fans, we don't know this is going on. We just know that it's still on track to come out when it's supposed to come out. So we don't know because we're still getting the same damn trailers that we could see. You know, like Zack Snyder's version of the Justice League trailers. We're still getting those. I don't know if any of you remember, because those are the same trailers we would see. Because I remember seeing certain things in those trailers that, especially like with Cyborg and that were not in that movie that came out. But I'm getting angry because I was mad when this movie came out. I remember the first scene, Superman. And I'm like, who the hell is this person? Clearly CGI. Like, it was, take a look at this nonsense. I remember seeing that scene and I knew from that moment on this was not Zack Snyder's movie. And my brain tuned out. Because that, if you know anything about Zack Snyder, this man does not cheat you with the content and quality of what he puts out. I mean, he puts his foot into everything he does. Now, you might not like it, but it is outstanding. You can't question what this man does. The movie kept going on, and I could see it in the theaters. I could see people going, huh? Like, all of a sudden, I remember having The Flash and Cyborg and Aquaman had zero backstory, like nothing. Like Cyborg was pretty much, I think he was like a statue. Like, you could tell the dialogue. You're like, what the hell happened? The movie's color and visuals, like, we knew as a fan base, this was not Zack Snyder's movie. Hey guys, this is the end of part 1, and I can't wait for part 2, and you guys definitely need to tune in to part 2 because we're going to go in deep. I'm going to shed light into how DC can actually reverse course or change course. And at the end, I'm actually going to give my recommendation for what DC can actually do to right their wrongs, because I really believe DC's best days are ahead and not behind. So catch me on part 2. See you guys later. This is the African Comic Guy signing off. Peace.